Assalamu alaikum. So, inshallah, we'll get started. Sorry, I'm just a few minutes late. Before I get started, I know there was some sisters who came last time, and I was out of books, so I have a few more extra. It's only for the attendees, so like, if whoever didn't get, they can take it. And bookmarks, you can take it for anybody can take it, inshallah. So, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So inshallah, we'll get started. And let me just figure out. Okay, so there we go. Before we get to the new section, so I gave you guys the books. One of the things is if you read it ahead of time, we're gonna average do 2 chapters every session. I think it's good then, because then if you have questions or anything, then you could ask me, because the book is a bit more detailed than the actual talks. Now, before getting into the new section, I just want to just do a quick review of this, and I'll make it interactive, inshallah. So first thing, in our first session, I mentioned one of the leading causes of people having a crisis in faith, basically they lose their iman or they become distant from religion is what? What's one of the leading causes? Traumatic events, exactly. Okay, and then I also mentioned, let me see what else I can say. Okay. The word ibtila, what does it mean? Ibtila. To be tested, yeah. And give an example.
Well, health.
Okay, exactly. So wealth is a test, right? I mentioned a particular surah that highlights the nature of tests. What surah was it? Fajr, yeah, subhanAllah. And Fajr, I mentioned that it mentions tests both in ease as well as in difficulty. And I also mentioned that if you look into surah and you kind of reflect on it, does it indicate that tests are more difficult when you're in hardship or when you're in ease? Based on the ayahs of Surah Fajr. And sisters, feel free to, if you want to answer. Ease, right? And why? Because the ayahs, so the ayahs about test are in the middle of Surah Fajr, but the ayahs preceding it speak about nations who had a lot of wealth, but they were corrupt. And the ayahs after it speak about not honoring the orphan, being greedy, not helping the poor, which are more related to having wealth. I also mentioned the word fitna. What does the word fitna mean? Fitna? Trial. Okay, good. And linguistically, what does it mean?
Purification of gold.
MashaAllah, yeah, exactly. So you burn gold and you burn silver and then you purify like that. And how's that connected to us?
The more we get tested, the more we are purified.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's good for the review. So let me just get to the next part. Actually, there's one thing, it's a story that I forgot to mention last time. When I was talking, I mentioned many hadiths and ayahs related to the world and how insignificant it is in the sight of Allah. And there's a story that I forgot to mention in the lecture, but it's in the book. So basically, there was a ruler, Harun al-Rashid. You guys have heard of Harun al-Rashid, right? He was a famous Muslim ruler who was known for his justice. And one day, and so he was a ruler when the Muslims were very powerful, right? And one day he was thirsty. He wanted a glass of water. So one of the pious people goes to him and he wants water. So he says, if I don't give you this glass of water, would you trade half of your kingdom for this glass of water? He said, I guess I would. Because if you don't have water, eventually you're going to die, right? Everybody needs water to survive. So then he gives him the water. He drinks it. And he says, if you lose your ability to basically pass that water, basically go to the washroom, would you trade half of your kingdom to get that ability back? He says, "Oh, of course, because again, if you can't, basically pass that water, go to the washroom, you're gonna get sick and you could die again." So then he says, "I would." So then he said, "What's the worth of your kingdom? It's not even worth a glass of water." SubhanAllah, and this is the reality of this world. It has very little significance, as I mentioned. And it's something I forgot to mention, and I thought I'd mention it. By the way, did anybody actually start reading the book? I know one brother mentioned it. Anybody? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, good. Yeah, so I hope, inshallah, because again, the book is more detailed than the actual lectures. Okay, so we're going to get into the names and qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So why are we going to get into this? There's a few reasons. And one of the things actually beyond understanding trials and tribulations is, we're supposed to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the most, more than anything. But how can we claim to love a being that we don't know, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown us his names and attributes through the Quran, through the Sunnah. And he wants us to know who he is. And unfortunately, many times we neglect this. Even religious people, right? They'll study fiqh, they'll study arcane theology, right? Like weird topics, especially in McGill. I know like in the universities, you get into all these exotic topics, and then the foundations of the faith people don't pay attention to. But the reality is we're on this earth to know Allah and to worship him, right? And that's what one of the Hassan al-Basri said, whoever knows his Lord will love him, whoever knows this world will stay away from it, right? So this is one of the things is, and it's really, unfortunately, even in our Islamic education, right? I remember growing up, I don't know if it's changed, but it's very like, halal, haram, halal, haram. Is that like you're taught the rules, but you're not taught about the being who you're supposed to obey, why to follow the rules. Why do you love Allah? Why do you want to follow the rules? Why do you want to pray? And then a person gets into a crisis because they're told, you do this, you don't do that, but they're not told to love Allah. And the thing is, when you look at the life of the Sahaba and the Seerah, 13 years of the Seerah, there was very little rules. All it was about Allah and the next life and the prophets, developing their iman, and then the rules started coming. And okay, now in the context of trials and tribulations, have you guys have, I'm sure you've heard this, atheists say, if God is all loving, he's all powerful, then why is there evil in the world? You heard this, right? Very, they use this thing. There's a few things, and there's even a whole field of study, that's like a popular phrasing, but it's called theodicy, the study of evil. Why does evil exist in this world? And you could do a PhD thesis on it, right? You could go study it, and you could study it from an Islamic perspective, from a philosophical perspective, different philosophers, whether it's Eastern or Greek, you study it from Christianity, whatever religion, you could study that. You could spend your whole life studying that. And there have been people who studied how some of the great scholars of Islam dealt with the issue from a very detailed manner. Of course, this is not the place to talk about it in detail, but I think the basic premise of certain of these arguments, it should be understood. One, the idea, if God is all powerful and God is all merciful, why is there evil in this world? There's a few things to break down. One, as Muslims, we don't believe Allah is only all powerful and only all merciful. He has many names and attributes, right? And when the person asks that question, they don't take into account the other names and attributes. And that's why our section will be going into the other names and attributes to understand, how do we understand this world and understand our own limitations. As, for example, Allah is Al-Alim. He is the most knowledgeable. They don't mention that in the question, right? But if Allah is most knowledgeable, he knows what's best. Right? And we have very limited, understanding. The other thing to understand is the idea of evil. What we may perceive as evil is based on our finite perception of this world, of our existence. We don't understand everything of the universe. How can we? We're on this world for what? Like if you live, 100 years, how long has this universe existed? What did they say? I don't even know, billions and billions of years, right? How can we claim to know the whole picture? One example of this is if you take an ant and you put it in an encyclopedia, it's just going to crawl over the letters, right? And you'll have access to those letters that it's crawling over, but it doesn't understand the whole book, right? It just understands that small pixel, and that's insan. That's human beings. Doesn't matter what we think, how intelligent we think we are. we really have limited knowledge, right? And we will never encompass everything. This is the nature. I mean, look, when we're young, when we're kids, we have limited knowledge and we get more knowledge. And sometimes we get knowledge and what we thought was right was wrong, right? And you know, then even in science, things get discovered all the time. And then what you thought was right was wrong, right? You guys heard of Thomas Kuhn and paradigm shifts, right? What's the idea of paradigm shifts? Yeah.
Basically, in science, you always have like a certain set of beliefs at one point, and that's the current paradigm. And then you start understanding those things those current theories, that current data, so then the whole set of theories change to
Exactly. So then even in science, which we're so like, this is our access to reality, you'll have a paradigm which will exist for maybe centuries. And then people discover, oh, maybe it's not right. And then something new comes. And this is how human history goes. So this is something to understand. How do I go next? Okay, so now on the name of Al-Alim. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, "Asa an takrahu shay'an huwa khayrun lakum wa asa an tuhibbu shay'an huwa sharrun lakum." That perhaps you hate something, but there's good in it for you. And perhaps you love something, and there's bad in it for you. And this is an important principle to understand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Wallahu ya'lamu wa antum la ta'lamun." That Allah knows and you don't know. And this is, look, I'm sure we've had moments in our lives where we really wanted something. We really wanted it and we couldn't get it. We're like, oh man, why didn't I get that, right? Like, I don't know, you know, get into that program or get that job or whatever it is. And later on, we realize, okay, that thing wasn't really good for us, right? And then the opposite, sometimes we hate something, but there's benefit in it for us. But we don't necessarily see the wisdom at that time. And that's where we have to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, to break it down, you know, when we're kids and we're sick, and our parents take us to the doctor to get an injection because we're really sick, right? And we're screaming and we're crying, and like, why are they taking us to the doctor? And then there's this strange person with a coat on, and then they stab us with a needle. We're like, oh, why did my parents do it? Why are they doing this, right? And they give you a lollipop to make you feel better, but they've already traumatized you, right? But what we don't realize is that if our parents didn't take us to the doctor to get that injection, to get that pain, we would be far more sick, right? That we needed that injection to get better. And we need to go through things sometimes that we don't understand, and we feel like, oh, why is this happening? But it's good for us. As believers, we have to trust in Allah that it's good for us. And there are many examples from the seerah. You know, one of the famous is in Hudaybiyah. You know, inna fatahna laka fatham mubina, right? This surah Fath, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you have been given the clear victory to the Prophet and to the Sahaba. What victory is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about? When did this happen? Anybody, seerah students, anybody know from the seerah? No. So Fatih Makkah is basically the opening of Makkah when Islam spreads. It's not Fatih Makkah. Did you handle it? Anybody? No? Okay. Hudaybiyah. You guys know Hudaybiyah? Hudaybiyah. So basically, the Muslims were persecuted for basically at this point, this is roughly 2 decades. They were killed, they were tortured. Actually, maybe less. It was a long time. It was maybe roughly 2 decades. So they're killed, they're tortured, they're humiliated. The people who tried to wipe them out multiple times, the people who, did anything they could to harm the Muslims and to wipe them out. Now they have to sign a treaty with these people. And the issue of the treaty was not the treaty itself, but the treaty was humiliating to the Muslims. That it was one-sided. And the Sahaba around the Prophet, they were very upset that these people, they killed us, they persecuted us, and now we have to sign a treaty where they're in an advantage. It just seems, and then Allah revealed this ayah, that you have been given the clear victory. And you're thinking, what's the victory? We're still being humiliated. And the Hudaybiyah was the catalyst that allowed the Prophet and the Sahaba to give dawah to the society that they were being persecuted in. And many people delegation after delegation started becoming Muslim. Islam started spreading in this time, which led to the opening of Mecca. So you see how something, and I could give you example even more recent. Right now we're in a time of, heightened Islamophobia. But I remember 20 years ago, it was also pretty bad. And to be honest, I would argue maybe worse 20 years ago than it was now. And at that time, media propaganda was at its high. It was at its high. And at that time, Muslims in the West didn't have as strong of a voice as they have now. It was very hard to speak out. And yet at that time, more and more people were becoming Muslim. The Quran was the best-selling book, right? So it looked like, of course, it was negative, but from that negativity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opened good. And even now, I'm sure you guys are seeing, there's many people who are becoming Muslim, witnessing what's happening. You guys are aware of that, right? There's a lot of videos out there. And Allah bless our brothers and sisters in Gaza. One of the things that people, when they're watching all the tragedy they're going through, and they're seeing their iman, their faith, talking about non-Muslims, and even Muslims are being inspired by it, but they're like, their faith, they don't understand it. They're like, how can people have such strong faith? They've lost everything. And then they start studying Islam. And there's many cases of this. And I can guarantee you that more and more people will be entering into Islam. Guarantee you. From the experience of 20 years ago when we had, similar issues in terms of Islamophobia, it's more and more people will be entering into Islam, inshallah. Another example. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His knowledge is unlimited. He created everything. And as I mentioned, we only have a tiny pixel. So in Surah Kahf, right? Surah Kahf is a surah which we should recite once a week on Fridays. And you should memorize the first 10 ayah. In some hadith, the last 10 ayah, because it'll protect you from tajab. So Surah Kahf has different stories. And one of the stories is about Musa and Khidr, right? So, do you guys know the story of Musa and Khidr? So I don't have time to go into detail, but basically Musa, who's a prophet, he goes to Khidr. And Khidr is a difference of opinion, was he a prophet, but he was somebody who was very close to Allah. It seems like he was a prophet. So Musa goes to Khidr. Basically what happens is Allah asks, the people ask Musa, who's the most knowledgeable person? And Musa says, I am. And he's not being he's a prophet. And he's one of the closest, one of the highest prophets. So, he just naturally, he thought he had more knowledge. It wasn't like he was being arrogant. It's, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to teach him a lesson. So he goes meet this person, this slave of mine. And he goes on this journey, he meets this person named Khidr. And Khidr, he meets him. And Khidr basically, the summary of the story is Khidr starts doing stuff where Musa's like, what are you doing? And Musa just loses it every time Khidr does something. He's like, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Right? And Khidr's like, you're not supposed to ask me questions. But Musa can't help it, right? So that's basically the story. Khidr does stuff and Musa doesn't understand why. And after Khidr tells him the wisdom behind everything. So, but what I want to mention here is Musa, who is one of the greatest prophets, and Khidr, who is very close to Allah, who is probably a prophet as well. They are people who have a very high knowledge. And Musa and Khidr at one point, they're standing by the water, and a bird comes and it takes its beak and it takes a drop of water from the ocean. And then Khidr tells Musa, your knowledge and my knowledge compared to the knowledge of Allah is like this drop compared to the ocean. Subhanallah. Imagine, these are Musa, one of the greatest prophets. Khidr was either a prophet or somebody very knowledgeable, very high. And they're saying that their knowledge compared to the knowledge of Allah is just like a drop. So who are we to think that we figured it out, right? And when you study critiques of modernity, of the modern world, one of the things is we've conflated our advancement technologically with somehow we are more wise. Fine, we've invented all these things technologically. It doesn't mean more wise. We understand the nature of life. You say smartphone, but dumb people, right? Right? Our technology is getting smarter, but right? And then you see this, right? We have so many luxuries in our times, and yet you see the rise of depression and suicide and all these things because we haven't figured out the very fundamentals of reality, which come from revelation. Okay, so another name of Allah is Al-Kareem, the most generous. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most generous. You know, and He has given us everything that, you know, we have, right? That our existence, we only came to existence out of His generosity, right? He didn't have to create us, right? He didn't have to give us all the things that He has given us, but out of His generosity, He has created us. And He has given us so many blessings that we can't even fathom and count them. Going back to the story of Musa and Khidr. So one of the events that happened is Musa and Khidr, they're going, there's like what's it called, a boat. Look with like what are those people called? Conduct the boats. Sea people? I don't know, I'm tired. When you're the people who are sailing the boats, what are they called? Fishermen? Sailors, exactly. Yeah, perfect. So sailors. So he's they meet these sailors, and Musa and Khidr ask for a ride. So sailors say, "Come on our boat," and they get on the boat. And Khidr, he looks at the boat, he sees it on the bottom of the boat, he makes a hole in it, and Musa's like, "What are you doing? They just gave us a ride." Imagine like. I ask Ilyas, give me a ride, and then he gives it to me, and then after he drops me, I pop his tire. I'm like, Jazakallah, you know? You know? So anyway, so he damages the boat, and Musa's like, why did you do that? And then later, Khidr tells him that because this was a commandment, he just didn't do it like that out of fun. That he damaged that boat because there was a king who was coming, and he was stealing the boats. Any boat he saw, he would steal it. So, but then he saw that this boat was damaged, so he didn't steal it. So then that incident, which looked evil, was actually protecting the sailors from something that was a greater evil. So again, sometimes we go through something like loss in life or something, you know, a failure, and we think, oh, why did this happen? But the reality is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not withhold it from you out of stinginess. He gave it to you, he withheld it from you because it was beneficial for you to not have that thing. Sufyan al-Thawri said, well, when you don't get something, it's not because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is stingy. It's because that thing wasn't good for you to begin with. And He will give you something better, right? So this is one thing that we understand, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Kareem. There was once a poor man, he went to a pious person, and he said, I have nothing. And you know, he's complaining about that he was poor. So then the pious person said, he was make shukr to Allah. Be grateful to Allah. And he said, be grateful for what? I don't have anything. So then the guy says, okay, fine. You don't have anything, right? I'll give you $10,000. At that time, it's dirhams. You know, now it's dollars or Bitcoin or whatever. So he says, I'll give you $10,000, right? You give me your eyes. You get $10, but just give me your eyes. He's like, what type of crazy thing? I'm not going to give you my eyes for $10,000. He said, okay, fine. Give me your tongue. Let me cut your tongue off, and I'll give you $10,000. Again, he's like, what are you talking about? I'm not going to give you my tongue for $10,000. He said, okay, fine. Let me just cut one of your hands. You could have the other hand, just let me cut one, and I'll give you 10,000. He said, I don't know what you're on. I'm not going to give you even for $1 million. He goes, okay, fine, final offer. See your brain? And you okay, let me just take a tiny piece of your brain out, and I'll give you 10,000. You'll still be alive, but you're just going to be a bit, your cognitive faculties will be a bit messed up. And again, he's like, I wouldn't give you any of these things for no matter how much money you give. So then he said, don't you feel ashamed that you're complaining you have nothing and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you things that are worth more than millions and millions of dollars? The money can put, you know, they're priceless. And Allah protect us all. If one of us was to lose even just our pinky, we would give millions of dollars to get it back. And these are things that we didn't work for. We didn't go study to get our eyes, to get our tongue. Our heart beats automatically. It's not like we have to think about it, right? So these are blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, and He is Al-Kareem. And this is one of the things, again, that we need to reflect upon. And one of the qualities of the believers is to reflect upon the blessings that we have. And we all have blessings. And when we reflect upon it, this will allow us to develop that quality of gratitude. And at times we live in a world, a materialistic world, where we think we're going to be happy when we get more and more. But that's not the key to happiness. The key to happiness is to be grateful for that what you have. And the greatest thing that you have, greater than your eyes, greater than your tongue, greater than everything, is Iman, is faith in Allah. And that's why Abdullah bin Mas'ud, one of the Sahaba, he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives wealth to those whom He loves and those whom He doesn't love. Pharaoh had wealth, right? Pharaoh had wealth. Many of the corrupt leaders had wealth. Many oppressive people have wealth. Righteous people can have wealth too, but it's not a criteria that you have wealth that Allah loves you. And we talked about this last week. If you look at the story of Musa and Pharaoh, Pharaoh was the leader of the state. He had wealth. Musa was a fugitive. He was a refugee. He was a criminal in the Egyptian society. But Musa was beloved to Allah and Pharaoh was hated. Because why? Musa had Iman. So wealth is not a sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you. Iman is a sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you. Faith. And that's why one of the du'as that we say, we are told to say daily, in the morning and evening, رَضِيتُ بِاللَّهِ رَبَّا وَبِالْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا وَبِمُحَمَّدٍ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ نَبِيًّا. That I am pleased with Allah as my Lord, Islam as my religion, and Muhammad, peace be upon him, as my prophet. That we say this every day, and it's a reminder to us that no matter what you lose in this life, so long as you have this, you have everything, right? And it's very interesting, when you, any psychology students? No? So they have this thing when you study psychology and self-help, that one of the ways to kind of help deal with like depression and sadness is you write down the things you're grateful for every day. And it's amazing because here, this is one of the du'as that it's actually a reminder for us that we're grateful for the greatest gifts, right? So it's this is something for us to reflect upon. And next, Al-Qadir, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who He's all-powerful. And nobody can change your condition except Allah, right? And we rely on Allah for everything. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever has happened, He allowed it to happen for our wisdom. As I mentioned, He is the most knowledgeable, He's the most wise. And therefore, when you complain to others, they can't help you. Like you could vent. Venting is fine, right? Like going and you just have to let off steam or getting advice. But the reality is you want to complain to Allah, because only Allah is the one who can change your condition. And again, I'm not negating speaking to others, because if you keep it in, that might not be healthy either. It's good to speak to others. But the idea is that you rely on Allah and you recognize that whatever happened in this life, whatever happened in your life, you failed that exam, that it was meant for you to fail that exam. Now, you had to study. I'm not saying not to study, like you fail and you tell your friends, oh, I was meant to fail. But the thing is, it was decreed for you that whatever you did, if it wasn't meant to be, it wouldn't have come. And similarly, if you get something, it was because that was decreed. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ told Ibn Abbas, if all the nations were to gather together to harm you, if Allah was to protect you, to ordain that they can't harm you, they won't be able to harm you. And if all the nations will gather together to benefit you, they will not be able to benefit you, except if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed that harm will to come to you. So this is the quality that the believers have. And next, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Who is the most beloved person in our lives? Like living, it's probably our mothers, right? Right? And the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah is more merciful to a servant than a mother is to her child. Just like we couldn't conceive our mother trying to light us on fire, right? Or to harm us, then we should understand that, sometimes we have this conception of Allah that He's out to get us. But the reality is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. And even the word, what's the word for womb in Arabic? Raham. The same word, Raham, comes from the same root as Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. The name of Allah, the most compassionate and merciful, comes from the same root as the womb. Right? And the womb, by its nature, it carries a child for those 9 months, and it expands, it gives its life, and the mother goes through all these difficulties so that she can give birth to this child. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. And the level of His mercy, it's mentioned in one hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has divided His mercy into 100 parts. And only one part is in this world. And from that part, all the goodness we see is from that one part. That the mother taking care of her child, even the animal that's taking care of its child, all the mercy we see, all the love we see, since the beginning of humanity, since the beginning of existence, is from that one portion. And in the next life, the rest, 99%, will be there. Another name of Allah, Al-Wadud, the most loving. This is an interesting name. It comes in the Quran only twice. It comes once in Surah Hud and the other in Surah Buruj. He is the most loving and the most forgiving. And one of the interesting things is if you look at Surah Buruj and you study Surah Buruj, this name comes, as I mentioned, only twice in the Quran. Surah Buruj, does anybody know the story of Surah Buruj, like the background, what it's about? No? Surah Buruj, if you go look it up, it's Surah 85. It's a surah about genocide. How believers were basically burnt alive because they were believers. And in the context of that surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He is the most loving. And it's a reminder to us that even in your greatest suffering, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there and He loves you. Right? And it's very important, because shaitan will come and say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abandoned you and He hates you. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most loving. Right? And interesting thing about wadud, does anybody know other words in Arabic for love? Huh? Hub, right? What's the difference between hub and this? So one of the things the scholars say is hub is like, okay, somebody can love somebody, but maybe they don't have the ability or the desire to express it. So for example, they could love you, but they don't necessarily, they love you from a distance, or whatever. They don't have the ability to manifest that love. So hub is encompassing. It doesn't necessitate action. Wud, from wadud, is to love and to show that love by giving. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves us and He shows it by giving us all the time. All the time He shows it. Right? Every breath is a gift from Allah. Right? He didn't have to give us one breath. So these are just some of the names and attributes of Allah. And subhanAllah, I don't know if I should go to the next section, because we're already 34 minutes in. Should we, maybe, I guess if there's questions, and if not, then we can go to the next. Is there any questions? Yeah. Yeah, so what is that criteria? The more you love Allah, it's a sign that He loves you. To me, the more you, in the Quran it says, say if you love Allah, follow me, meaning the Prophet ﷺ. So the more you have a desire to follow the Prophet, the more you try to be like the Prophet, following the teachings of the Prophet, his way, then this is a sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pulling you towards Him. Right? So that's the criteria. And that's why there's a beautiful hadith, it's a long hadith Qudsi, where basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this hadith Qudsi, that my servant does not get closer to me than anything more beloved to me than that which I've made obligatory upon them. So like the prayers, the fasting, all those things. And then He says, and then again, paraphrasing, then they become closer to me by doing the extra, right? So what's the extras? For example, you pray 5 times a day and you get up at night and you pray to Allah. You fast in Ramadan and you fast extra outside of Ramadan. You give your zakat, but now you give sadaqah. So then he says, when they do this, they become beloved to me. And they will become beloved to me, then I become the eyes by which they see, the ears by which they hear. And what does this mean? It doesn't mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes us. That's not what it means. It means that we get the sweetness of Iman, that everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves, we'll start loving it, right? So that's the path. And one thing I want to mention, actually, I forgot to mention this, about the names of Allah. Have you guys heard of Dr. Jinan Yusuf? Huh? Look her up. She has written some of the best work on the names and attributes of Allah. She's published books, but she has podcasts, she has articles. In English language, probably the best on the names and attributes of Allah. And I highly recommend everybody. Is it clarified? Is it good? Any other questions? Right here? Okay, sure. Okay. I don't want to spell her last name, but I think it's probably like this. But if you type it in, I'm sure you'll find it. I just type in Jinan 99 names and you'll find it. And her book is very beautiful, and she has like articles online, everything. Any other questions? Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know how use the word with for like describe the love of the husband and wife. Is it the word
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's derived from the word wudud. Ar-Rauf. Yeah, it's also related to compassion and care. Now, the specific details, how it distinct, because this is one of the things. When you look at the names and attributes, the translations are very similar, right? So, for example, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, what's the difference, right? And the scholars discuss what the difference is. Ar-Rauf, to be honest with you, we translate as the benevolent or the caring. The specifics to it, I have to double check. Maybe I'll try to get a next class. But for sure, Dr. Jinan Yusuf will have that distinction, but I'll make a mental note and I'll mention in the next class, inshallah. Any other questions? No? Sisters? Okay, so I know it's 7:45, so maybe we'll go to the next section then? What do you guys think? It's okay? Half, we'll do half. We'll do half, yeah. The benefits of trials and tribulations. So one of the things is, you guys are all students, and you have to study to basically get good grades and to get into degrees that you want. I don't know. I don't think you guys like studying, or maybe you guys do. I don't know. Right? Nobody just likes studying, and well, I guess some people do. But if you have a choice between going out, getting some fresh air, going out with your friends, or just relaxing, watching something, and then studying, what would you pick if you had the choice? Right? I don't know. Maybe you guys like studying more. I don't. Nobody like, oh, I have an exam, I'm so happy, right? Right? But why do we do tests? Why do we do exams? Because we do them because we understand if I do this exam, I'm going to get good on this course. If I get good in this course, I'll get good, in my program, and then I'll get my degree. And then when I get my degree, then I'll get a good job, and it follows, then I get a good life. That's why we do it, right? That's why we study in elementary school, so we get to next grade, and then we get next grade, and we get to high school, then high school to college and uni. That's how life is. We're always doing exams. And the higher up you go in your field, the harder the exams are. But you're willing to sacrifice it, basically because you want, to get a nice living. I remember any computer software engineer, IT. I remember, so I did a thing in network administration. We had to study Cisco. You guys, Cisco, or is it old now? You know about it, Cisco? Oh, well, that is the most boring thing ever. It's torture. But we wanted to get a good jobs, so we studied it. So the point being is we take exams and we study because we want success in this life. Similarly, when we are put through tests in this life, there are benefits to it, right? And the thing is, we don't think that there are benefits to it, and that's why we hesitate when it happens, and we're like, why is this happening? But there are benefits. And when we understand the fact that there are benefits, we'll be able to handle it better. And we trust in Allah. And again, because I think it's important to, think about the context of what's happening to our brothers and sisters in Palestine. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen videos, that they lost their whole families, everything, and yet their faith, when they talk about, Allah is sufficient. I trust in Allah. It's something that, we can really learn from, because they understand, they trust in Allah. They understand that He hasn't abandoned them, right? So first thing to understand about the benefits is that any pain, any suffering that you go through in this life, it will be a means of you removing your sins. The Prophet ﷺ said that no fatigue, no disease, no sorrow, no sadness, nor hurt, nor distress befalls a Muslim, even if it was a prick of a thorn. But that Allah expiates some of his sins for that suffering. So whatever suffering you go through, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is purifying you. He's removing, as we mentioned, the idea of fitna, right? The burning of the gold. It's purifying you, right? And to the point where there'll be people who will walk around this earth without any sins, right? Because of all the suffering they went through, right? And in the next life, they'll see the status that they're given in Jannah. And people will envy them. I wish I was tested like this person, because they will have such a high status. And that's why, as we're gonna have a whole section, probably next week, on the tests of the righteous people. Because the most beloved people to Allah are tested the most, as we're going to see next week. And the next thing is that when you are tested and you are patient and you have iman, you have trust in Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide your heart. He will protect your heart. And the word in Arabic for heart is what? Qalb, right? Linguistically, what's the meaning of qalb linguistically? Exactly, alter, right? Like flip around to change. And the Prophet ﷺ said that the qalb is like, it's constantly altering, it's constantly flipping around. And we feel this as people, right? Sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're sad, sometimes you're, whatever, anxious, sometimes you're excited about something. We're always fluctuating in all these different states. That's the nature of the heart. And that's why in one hadith, I don't know if I mentioned it here, I didn't. That one hadith, basically the Prophet said that the heart is like a feather that gets like pulled by the wind, right? Like a feather, it just moves, fluctuates. But when you have iman, that will anchor your heart. It will protect your heart and give it strength. And that's like one of the most frequent du'as that the Prophet used to say is, Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala dinik. O turner of hearts, referring to Allah, make my heart firm upon your religion. Right? So this is one thing. Next is benefit. This is a very famous ayah. Allah yukallifu nafsan illa wusaha. I'm sure you guys, or part of an ayah, right? That Allah does not require any soul more than what it can afford. This translation's, I'm not crazy about it, but one of the ways to translate would be that Allah does not burden a soul more than it can bear. Okay? And what does this mean? Right? What this means is, if you are going through something, if you're going through a difficulty, you can handle it. Because Allah will not put something on you that you couldn't handle. Right? That's one of the implications of this ayah. And again, when you're going through it, like, oh, this is too much. No, Allah knew that you can handle it. That's why He gave it to you. Let me give you guys an example. It's like if you go to the gym and you're exercising or whatever, right? And you have a particular routine, right? And you have a trainer. So let's just say, I don't know, you do like 20 minutes on the treadmill and it's like a certain speed. Or if you're lifting weights for the brothers, like, like, I don't know, you lift like, I don't know, like 200 pounds, okay? Like a bench press. And then your trainer one day comes and he slabs another 10 pounds on there. on the weights. Like, what are you doing, man? I can't lift that. I can only lift 200, right? Or your trainer increases the speed on the treadmill. Like, what are you doing? I can't handle it. I can only go this. And you're like, no, like, you could do it. He's like, no, I can't do it. You could do it. I could do it. And then, okay, fine, you hesitate, but then you decide to do it. So then you try to lift it. It's like, 20 pounds heavier. It's painful. It's like hurting, you're aching, you're sweating, you're cursing the trainer. It's like, and then you do it and it hurts, but you did it. And the next time you try, it's a bit easier. Next time you try, a bit easier. And then now your capacity is no longer 200, it's like 220. Or for treadmill, now you could run faster. And you've become stronger. You've become faster, right? And this is how tests work, right? That we think we can handle it, Allah knows we can handle it. And then when we go through that test, we'll become stronger. Guaranteed. That's why some of the most amazing stories that you hear about people who've changed, the world, and there are people who went through immense trials. I mean, there's many examples, too many, but and you look at, for example, Nelson Mandela. You guys also know Nelson Mandela, right? He spent 27 years of his life in jail, and yet he became the symbol of anti-apartheid, of anti-racist movement in South Africa. And of course, there's so many examples. And as I mentioned, it'll make you stronger. And another thing is, famous ayat, إِنَّمَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, right? The word hardship, there becomes ease. Now, there's many layers you could take to this, but one of the things that people usually say is that, what does this mean? That after the hardship, there's going to be ease, right? And that is one of the meanings. But if you look at the ayah, it says ma'a. Ma'a means with. It doesn't say after. And the idea is that, going back to the idea of you becoming stronger, within that hardship, there is some benefit. There is some ease, right? It's not just there so that you're in difficult. There is some benefit. And, inshallah, you will understand that whether in this life or in the next, there is some benefit. And I gave many examples previous. The other thing is when you're tested, and the sister asked about, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the signs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you. Again, the people closest to Allah are sometimes tested the most. And this is important for us to understand. And just to be clarified, it doesn't mean that we put ourselves in tests, right? Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He gives us ease, this is a blessing, right? But when we go through something, because shaitan will come to you and say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is punishing you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates you. But the reality is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you. And He's putting you through that so that you get closer to Him. And there's one thing, I'll give you a key thing. Have you, one of the questions that sometimes people ask is, how do you know when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is punishing you versus Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala testing you, right? Here's the thing. Whatever you go through in life, if that thing gets you closer to Allah, it's a test and it's a blessing. Because the whole point of our life is to get closer to Allah. So if you, for example, went through loss, maybe a loved one died, or you went through sickness, but you get closer to Allah, then that thing was a blessing. It really was. Opposite, if you get something and that thing pushes you away from Allah, then it's a punishment, right? And it goes back to that thing. You could get $1 million, you become arrogant. It wasn't a blessing. But you could get $1 million and use that to get closer to Allah, right? Because in Islam, we're not against wealth, but we just understand that wealth is not a criteria that by which Allah judges us. And I think I'll be able to finish this section and then we'll wrap it up. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raise your status, that the tests you go through are a means of Allah raising your status. And for sure in the next life, for sure, as I mentioned, when the person sees their status in the next life, people will be envious of them and say, I want to be like that person. But even in this life, at times people will see that elevation. And I'll give you an example of this from the seerah. Bilal radiallahu anhu. Bilal, he was an early convert to Islam. He was a slave in that society. He had no rights. And because he was a slave, and because he became Muslim, and he had no rights, they would torture him. They would torture him to leave Islam. As many of the Sahaba, they tortured them. And the torture was so bad that it mentions at one point, so what they would do is they would torture them, say you don't believe in Allah, right? Say you don't believe in the Prophet. Basically to say kufr, to leave Islam. So at one point, it was so bad that the Sahaba who were tortured, they would say it. They didn't believe it, and they were forgiven, but they would, because it was something that they couldn't handle the torture. But it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave it because they were being tortured. It was fine. There's nothing, it was out of their capacity to endure that. Bilal Ta'anu at one point was the only one who refused to say anything against Allah and His Prophet. He never said a word of kufr. And when they were tortured, they mentioned they would put him in the burning sand, they would put giant rocks on him and burn him and whip him. And in that state, you say, Ahad, Ahad. Allah is one, or unique, Allah is one, right? And this is what he would do. So he refused to compromise his belief. And how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him? So, later on, he becomes free. And, when they go into Medina, they get to order for salat. And one of the things for salat is the adhan, right? The call for prayer. And who was commanded to give the adhan? The first mu'adhin of Islam, Bilal. The man who had no rights in society now was the first mu'adhin of Islam, the caller to prayer. All the millions and billions of people who call the adhan now, they follow in the footsteps of Bilal. And the Prophet ﷺ said in one hadith that he heard the footsteps of Bilal in paradise, that who he was. And another amazing thing is years later, when Makkah is open, basically Islam spreads. Bilal is there, and Islam has spread now, and the Kaaba, basically the Muslims are there. And what does the Prophet tell Bilal to? Go climb on top of the Kaaba and give the adhan. So the same person that was on the desert saying Ahad, Ahad, being tortured, now he's on top of the Kaaba in front of thousands of people screaming the oneness of Allah. You see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevates people when they are patient. And just to be clear, that elevation come in this life, and if it doesn't come in this life, it will certainly happen in the next life. Let's see how many. Okay, so just one more section. Next, this famous ayah which I started our lecture with, which speaks about the different tests that we go through, and it mentions something. We're tested, and it mentions that Bashar as-sabirin, give glad tidings to the patient. Now, one of the interesting things about this ayah is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, we will test you. And it says glad tidings to the patient. Now, the wording is very interesting. When I congratulate you because of something that good happens, right? Like you just got married, or you got a job, or you passed. Imagine like you failed your exam, or you lost your job. I'm like, congratulations. For what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying congratulations for the ones who are going through difficulty and they're patient. And He describes them. Who are they? They're the ones who say, when they are afflicted with difficulty, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. This is a famous dua. We don't just say this when people die. We say this in any difficulty. And it's a dua that we say that we belong to Allah, we return to Allah. Then one day, everything in this world will end, but we'll go back to our Creator. And then it says, they are the ones who have salawatu min rabbihim wa rahmah. They have the blessings of Allah, the mercy of Allah, ulaika hum muhtadun, and they are the guided. And one of the Salaf and the early Muslims said, why should I not be patient when Allah has promised three things which are better than everything in this world? He has promised for the patient, those who are patient in difficulty, that they will get the blessings of Allah, they'll get the mercy of Allah, and they'll get the guidance of Allah. And if you get these things in patience, it's better than anything you've lost. So that's it, inshallah, and mashallah. Perfect timing. So if there's any questions, comments, and I think I'll stop the recording. Okay, where's the recording? Oh, yeah.